you know, a lot of people like to kind of like watch a lot of horror movies, a lot of horror related stuff, you know, which I know you guys do as well, you know, and
Actually, like, the subject of horror movies has always been sort of an interesting one, and I guess it's something that it would be kind of fun to bring up. Is growing up, I did not like horror movies.
oh, you weren't a big horror
I
person.
didn't start liking horror movies until after I met you, and you kind of got me into horror films. So, thank you.
Yeah.
So what was the first horror film you remember him showing you?
Oh, what was it?
Well, I think we'll kind of get back to that later.
There's a lot.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's quite a bit. I basically just did the Clockwork Orange thing where I just held her in a chair and kind of just.
Except you're
Yeah,
the one who made me watch Clockwork Orange.
Well,
Oh.
because we got to get through the Stanley Kubrick
Here,
collection.
watch this. It's just like.
Pretty much. Pretty much.
Yeah,
Pretty
definitely.
much.
But well, what about John? What about you? Like, you know, what does the horror genre mean to you? You know?
Well, I suppose when I was younger, much younger, I was probably easily scared as a kid. Things, well, you know, the things that nowadays doesn't necessarily scare an average adult, like vampires for a start. I used to have some really crazy dreams about vampires. But then I'm trying to think what was my first experience of watching a horror film. Probably the old Universal Pictures, Boris Karloff and Frankenstein.
Oh, yes. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking
Bela
about.
Lugosi and Dracula. That was probably my first introduction, and I suppose for a younger person who used to be more scared of horror films, that was a nice way to ease into them, was the more of the black and white traditional things that, you know, by today's standards may seem somewhat hokey.
Yeah.
But some of them still stand up really
Oh, yeah.
well, especially with the acting of those actors.
Oh,
and,
yeah, absolutely.
and-
No, I 100% agree.
and the
you know.
themes carry through, you know, they're all based off of classic Gothic novels. So that was probably my first taste of horror.
Well,
I wouldn't really call it exactly a horror film, especially now, because it's definitely not scary by any means. But when I was a kid, even though I didn't like horror films or anything like that, I had a strange obsession with The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. So Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow was one of the probably scariest ones I watched.
oh yeah.
when
Well,
I was a kid.
it had that gothic horror look to it, you know.
Right.
Well, then I guess I'm more demented than both of you because
Well,
my first horror
I
experience.
could have told you that.
Thank you. But my first horror experience, I came when I was 2 years old, because my mom. You're probably gonna find this a funny story, but one time my mom, she was working at a job at the mall, and I guess she had me and my younger sister with me, and so I guess they decided to go. Her and a bunch of coworkers wanted her to go to the movie. She's like, I can't, but I got my kids. It's like, oh no, it's okay, we'll come, we'll watch them for you. Guess what we went up watching?
What?
Scream 2.
Oh gosh.
And apparently I thought it was the funniest thing ever.
Of course you would.
Yeah, I think Jackie was the one. I think my sister was the one who was terrified of it. But you know, I even saw the Exorcist when I was like 6 or 7. I mean, it freaked me out, but I don't know, all the swearing kind of made me laugh. So even still does. I mean, it's just I don't find it jaw-dropping scary anymore because
Right.
all the things that come out of that little girl's mouth when she's possessed, I was like, damn.
This was like, what?
Forget a holy water. Give this girl a swear jar. Just, I'm like, geez, this girl's a bigger. This girl swears more than I do half the time, and in a more creative way than I do. But you know, like you were saying with like Universal, that was the studio that really put horror on the map. Was Universal,
course.
you know.
I think so.
And you know, because like with the monster movies like Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, the Mummy, the Invisible Man, you know,
Creature from the Black Lagoon.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. You know, so I think for a good long while, like all the way throughout the 30s and even in the 40s and 50s, you know, horror. Well, I would say the 40s because I think it was the 50s is when they started to play a little more with science fiction. You know.
Yes.
But
the atomic age.
Yeah, but the 30s and
Giant
40s.
insects.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's funny because I know back then it was mostly just like creature features. You know.
Right.
But and I know, and of course back and then it later evolved into like like you got like the Hammer films,
Yes.
which were like which were a little more bloodier, but kind of played more on the exploitative side of things as
Right.
well. You know. And I don't know what you would call it, like, and of course the 60s, you know how you kind of had like the Hitchcockian
Right,
era,
right.
which with Psycho and the Birds and everything like that, where
Yeah, it started turning from, these weird creatures to your next door neighbor.
Exactly.
Right. The guy who
Or-
runs the motel.
Exactly.
Or
Just,
yeah.
The bad guy could be anyone.
Exactly.
That's when that first started. We started seeing that. Because before then, it was just,
And it's funny,
the
'cause
person
even-
who looked crazy.
Yeah. Somewhere in the 70s, kind of was like more of like that's where the slasher
Yeah.
age kind of began because with like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Black Christmas, which a lot of people tend to forget, which is actually one of my favorite horror movies, which is Black Christmas. It's a very underrated film. I mean, it's not the best, but it's like I like to watch it around every Christmas time as well. So, and of course, good old Michael Myers himself revolutionized it more in this 1978 with Halloween.
I love Halloween.
Oh my God,
so
yeah,
much.
definitely.
So much.
And it was a movie that really, really like it was at the time it was considered the highest grossing like independent movie because it was made for. I think it had like a budget of $320,000.
That sounds right.
Yeah, and then of course for after that Jason, Friday the 13th movies, the Nightmare on Elm Street movies kind of came along.
Right. Yeah.
And then I don't know. Then the 90s was kind of a weird.
The 90s was a weird time.
It was a weird time for
films.
horror films because
Pop culture in general.
Yeah, pop culture. Because,
That's true.
But then again, I think that was kind of the time when they kind of went the more meta routes too, like with Scream.
Yeah.
Because it was the time where they were kind of poking fun at itself. But then again, you also had movies like Candyman, Sleepy Hollow, which kind of were like in ways gothic horror films as well. I mean, at least,
Right.
and that's how I view Candyman. I view it as a gothic horror film. I don't know how you guys, or if you guys have even seen it, how you guys would interpret that as well.
It's been a long time since I've seen Candyman. I kind of remember
I
it
haven't.
being I would agree there was gothic elements, but I guess it was sort of a modern urban twist
I think so.
of the gothic
I mean, I don't know, like.
gothic legends.
Yeah, all I know is the 90s was a weird time for it because it didn't really have a central theme. I think it was trying to figure out where it was, and then the 2000s was when we got a bunch of PG-13 horror films
Yeah.
and a bunch of like remakes.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
It was definitely the decade for remakes of foreign
Yeah.
horror films. Like
Yeah, definitely.
extremely.
And then the mid 2000s was the rise of what I was what you would call I think the torture porn type thing, like
so like
Saw.
the Hostel movies, the French New Wave movement, where they were pushing out like all these super violent horror films and stuff.
Final Destination.
Yeah, Final Destination. But Final Destination came out in the early 2000s. I wouldn't consider it as a torture porn, but it was kind of like I consider it a Looney Tunes horror movie because, I mean, the situations they put them in are just so laughable.
Yeah, that's true.
And then the late 2000s, I had a hard time figuring that one out because I feel like it was kind of the same way. It kind of lost its footing in the late 2000s.
I feel like they were trying to be a bit more serious, but was it working?
Yeah, exactly.
It was just kind of just a weird time.
Yeah.
For,
Yeah, definitely. And then
I don't know what happened to the 90s and 2000s, but it was weird.
And then the
with
2000s
movies.
happened, and then for a while, it was kind of like a run of the same stuff, and the same thing from like all the way from like 2010 to 2016. It's kind of like a mishmash of like a lot of the same
Yeah.
stuff. You know, even though we had like some up and rising new talent, you know, I mean, some of the work they put out didn't really resonate at all.
Mhm.
And then it got a makeover again when Jordan Peele hit the scene in 2017 with Get
Right.
Out, which
Mhm.
the thing what he did with it was he was doing something that I noticed hadn't been done in a long time, which is he's using the genre to deliver social commentary, because like kind of like what George Romero would used to do with his zombie films.
Right.
Exactly.
You know, he would, you know, it also, and I noticed this too, it also brought the new wave of like people who got their start in comedy.
Yeah, I've
delving
noticed that a lot
delving
lately
into
too.
horror,
Yeah.
with fantastic results. I mean, because like a year later, John Krasinski brought us A Quiet Place,
Oh,
which
it was great as well.
which is like one of the best science fiction horror films in a long ass time.
Mhm.
You know, I guess now Chris Rock is going to be writing, starring, and producing a reboot of Saw. I don't know if you knew about that or not. You know, so
That's news to me.
yeah, like
I mean, to be fair, I am personally not a fan of Saw, because I think when it comes to the horror genre, like I like blood and guts and everything, but I think I prefer,
you're like me, before more psychological elements.
yeah,
like,
psychological.
yeah, like
I want to think about
yeah,
it.
like,
just
I'm
watch,
more-
not
I'm-
just like ew.
Yeah, I'm more with you with Saw. Like, I mean, honestly, I mean, the first movie, it had some interesting things going with it. It wasn't a flat out horror film. It was also it had this cool kind of detective mystery kind of going on, and believe it or not, the first Saw is actually the least violent one out of them all. You know,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and it was actually kind of a solid movie. The reason why I don't like the sequels, except for the sixth one, was because of what the directors after James Wan turned it into, you know, which was a bunch of like, it was basically a movie about let's see what kind of traps they're gonna introduce and how are people gonna get butchered, you know.
Mhm.
You know, so and that's I was like, oh man, I can handle gore and stuff in horror movies, but you know, I don't want to watch a movie where people are just getting torn limb from limb for without some type of substance to it, because then
Exactly.
I'm just like, wow,
Yeah.
I feel like a delinquent, you know,
Yeah.
because that's how I felt watching Hostel, you know. I'm like, the concept's kind of interesting, but then again, there's no substance to it, so I'm like, I don't feel comfortable watching this. I was like, you know.
Yeah, I guess now would be a good time to say you introduced me to A Tale of Two Sisters,
Yeah.
and it's pretty much been my favorite horror film ever since.
Oh yeah.
Honestly, I just think it's a beautiful movie.
Oh, I fully
And
agree. It's like
Even though it's a horror film, I actually find it really sad.
It
because
is.
The storyline is very sad.
yeah, it is, because basically like it's like you're watching a poem. You're watching a poem play out on screen, you know. And I know it's written based off of a really really short story. I
Yeah.
forget what it's called though.
It's
but,
actually based off of a South Korean urban legend.
oh. Okay.
And I've actually read it, and it's very interesting.
Oh, okay. In fact, I agree with you on Tale of Two Sisters, because I think like that's like my number one all-time favorite horror film of all time. You know,
It's
because
beautiful.
it's in my top 10 favorite movies of all
Mhm,
time. You
same.
know, yeah.
I have to say, well, this movie, which is by my all-time favorite film director, Stanley Kubrick.
Is it The Shining?
It's The Shining.
Yeah, I knew.
Of
but
course it is. I don't even know
But you know what?
why it
Hey,
is.
I don't blame you. I really don't blame you.
Right.
You know.
I think it has everything going for it, not just as a horror film, but as a film in general. I do know that a lot of critics of the movie say that, well, it feels too long. Some people even dare to say that it's not scary. I feel like it's a film that effectively wears you down. It wears you down along with the character of Jack.
Yeah.
That you follow him in this sort of, at first, what seems to be a mundane quest. And it kind of starts that way in the book, too. I read the book in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And then I actually read it before I saw the Stanley Kubrick movie, because that was just when I was starting to get more into other films. But it starts in this sort of mundane thing of he needs to get a job. Jack needs to get a job, and so he kisses up to the owners of the hotel, says that he'll work there for the winter, and then that's when they drop the bombshell that, oh well, there were murders up here. A guy killed his family and then killed himself.
That's the thing that always found me is like, okay, all right, now that you've accepted the job, here's all the crazy that happened in the hotel, just so you were aware. And I would be like, bitch, you couldn't tell me that before you hired me.
Right.
Come play with us.
A lot of people might consider it to be the first epic horror film, because Stanley Kubrick, he was not trying to make a conventional horror film. He was like, I mean, I know Stephen King to this day, and I'm sure to his dying day, will always hate that movie because of how unfaithful it is. And I will agree, it's not faithful at all to the book.
It's not. But it's not an adaptation; it's an interpretation.
Yeah, but
for sure.
that's the thing that gets me. Is like, I don't think he ever intended to adapt the book.
No.
The things that he did with the camera, the things.
Yeah, the way he used the Steadicam, the glide cam, fantastic.
Yeah, and just the way that the tension's built up and everything. You
Bloody
know.
elevator.
Yeah, exactly. Just the imagery. You know, and I think that's why. And you know, I think the reason why people reacted to it back then when it came out was because they didn't know how to process it, because it was so polarizing. They were like, they just didn't know how to react to it at the time, you know. But
at the core of The Shining, when you take away all its style and all its creepiness, at the core, it's about a family coming apart.
Yeah.
It's about something that we recognize as good being rotted from the inside out and being twisted by powers that they don't understand, which is something that, going back to Stephen King, is something he's good at.
Yeah.
As he presents these characters that you like and you love. Maybe Kubrick was a little cold towards the characters the whole time. It's still about a family that's coming apart. It's about a husband who's going to commit the ultimate sin, and is going to kill his own family. And so I think that's what makes really effective horror.
the movie that I had that impacted me when I first saw it was Event Horizon.
Okay.
Have you guys heard of it?
I've heard of it.
Yeah.
I saw a movie when I think it was like my 8th grade freshman. When I was like 14 or 15 years old. That's when I saw it, and I couldn't. After it ended, I really couldn't tell what to think of it. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll probably come back to it later, because I just couldn't think. I just didn't know what to think of it at the time. But you know, that movie just kept playing over in my head. It just, the imagery just kept fucking with me, and you know, it was so weird because, you know, like all the things that were in it, it kind of like really, really stuck with me, even though I was kind of didn't really have a full solid opinion of it yet. You know, it's like, you know, you read a book, or if you listen to like an album, but yet for some reason it's like you finish it, and yet for some reason it just will not leave you alone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's how I felt with this movie. But the thing I found kind of weird was the thing that kind of entranced me was the atmosphere and the ambiguity behind it, because, you know, like if you go and watch the movie and if you look at the ship in Event Horizon, the way they designed the ship was something I've never seen before. You know, it was a spaceship, but yet it had this it had this gothic kind of like religious design to it. Like if you look at a bird's eye view of the Event Horizon ship, it looks like a cross.
Okay.
It looks like a cross, and of course, yeah, but the atmosphere was so eerie. It was so supernatural. Like you're like, wow, okay, I've never really felt this, especially in a sci-fi horror film. You know, that's very hard to capture. Like, you know, but there's a part called the gravity drive where the room looks like a torture chamber. The gravity drive is this giant spinning orb, but it looks like Pandora's box, the little box thing from Hellraiser. That's kind of what it looks like, and the walls around it have like these giant spikes, metal spikes coming down, looming all around it.
Okay.
Like it looked even watching this is like, you know, I would not want to be in that room for a minute. And the one thing I found so interesting was how, like The Shining, was how the ship played with the crew's head. You know, it played with them by by making them face the things that they were pressing inside of them.
Mhm.
Like because it has Lawrence Fishburne, Sam Neill, and a bunch of other people, but
That's right.
you know, he was able to overcome it because, in my ways, because a spoiler with him is like the thing he's been hiding, he's been suppressing was the idea that he had to abandon a crew member during a mission because something happened and he had to abandon him and he left him there to die and he basically burnt alive on that ship. But he's the only one of the crew to actually face it. Because there's a scene where he's talking to Jason Isaacs' character. I forgot he's in it too, Jason Isaacs.
Interesting.
He's basically opening up and in a way, he's kind of confessing his sin if you look at it, you know, and that's how he's able to overcome all the crazy shit that goes on because, you know, he's able to confess his sin, which, you know, a lot of the other crew members don't. You know, even Sam Neill's character, you know, he's basically the ship's designer, but he deals with the guilt of his wife committing suicide because of her loneliness, and the ship begins to f with him like that, and it drives him to insanity where he becomes the villain. The themes, the ambiguity, and like the imagery, you know, you're just like, wow, is that movie gonna get up and f with me again? You know, because that's kind of how I felt watching it. Because I was like, it's not, like I said, it's not the best. I mean, I think my final rating would be a 7.5 of it, but it is still a truly criminally underrated film, and in my opinion, Paul Anderson's best work. And yeah, so that's the movie that kind of that had an impact on me. You know, the horror film. You know.
I will have to check that one out.
Yeah, it's on Hulu. It is on Hulu.
Is it?
So,
Okay.
Yeah, it is on Hulu. So if you get a chance, just you go on Hulu, type it in, it's on there. You know.